When police were called on a homeless veteran, nobody expected what happened next. The shopping center manager wanted him gone immediately. Rain soaked through his worn Vietnam cap as he stood alone, invisible to the crowd gathering around him. Then the officer arrived, glanced down, and froze. Those dog tags changed everything. Look closer. Sometimes heroes hide in plain sight. The morning air bit with autumn's chill as Thomas Mercer sat quietly at the edge of Westview Shopping Plaza. His weathered hands clutched a paper cup of coffee, steam rising between fingers marked with old scars and arthritis. At 73, his posture remained relatively straight despite obvious discomfort. The faded Vietnam veteran cap perched on his thinning gray hair had seen better days, much like its owner. Thomas had taken shelter in the community center's glass entryway last night when the temperature dropped below freezing. The marble floor had been hard against his aging bones, aggravating the old injuries that never quite healed right. He wasn't causing trouble, just trying to survive another night. His military pension had been tied up in bureaucratic red tape for months after a banking error flagged his account. His small apartment, gone. His dignity, increasingly difficult to maintain. Across the plaza, early morning shoppers hurried between stores, collars turned up against the cold. A few glanced his way, their expressions a mixture of pity and discomfort before quickly looking away. Thomas was used to being invisible. After Vietnam, many veterans had learned that skill the hard way. "Sir, you can't loiter here." The shopping center manager approached, clipboard in hand, eyes narrowed with suspicion. His name tag read James Pullman, property manager, in bold letters that matched his confident stride. "We've had complaints from customers." Thomas looked up with tired eyes that had seen their share of hardship. "Just warming up a bit before the bus comes," he said, his voice rough from years of cigarettes he could no longer afford. "I'll be moving along shortly." The manager, a young man in his 30s with an expensive haircut and designer glasses, scoffed. His polished shoes reflected the overhead lights as he shifted impatiently. "That's what you said yesterday. Look, I don't want any trouble, but this is private property." A small crowd of morning shoppers had begun to gather, watching the exchange with uncomfortable expressions. A mother pulled her curious child closer, whispering something that made the little girl stare. An elderly couple shook their heads sadly but kept walking. No one stepped forward. "I understand," Thomas said, slowly gathering his small backpack and the tattered sleeping bag he kept rolled tight. A metal tag glinted briefly on a chain around his neck before disappearing beneath his collar. His movements were stiff, joints protesting after a night on the hard floor. "Actually, I think you don't understand," the manager continued, voice rising. His manicured hand gestured emphatically toward the plaza entrance. "This isn't a homeless shelter. We're trying to run businesses here. People don't come to shop when there are." He paused, looking Thomas up and down with distaste, "People like you hanging around." Rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier, drumming against the awning overhead. The gray sky matched Thomas's mood as he struggled to his feet, his left knee, damaged from an old injury during his service, protesting with pain that shot up his leg. He winced slightly but caught himself. "I served this country for 20 years, Thomas said quietly, not as a boast but as a simple statement of fact. Water dripped from the brim of his cap as he stood in the increasing downpour, just beyond the shelter of the awning where the manager remained dry. The manager rolled his eyes dramatically, making sure the gathering onlookers could see his exasperation. "Yeah, you and every other panhandler around here. Save it." He pulled out his phone, the latest model that probably cost more than Thomas would see in a month. "I'm calling the police. Maybe a night in jail will help you figure out somewhere else to be." A young woman with kind eyes started to step forward, but hesitated when her companion grabbed her arm and whispered something urgently. She looked conflicted, then reluctantly stepped back into the safety of anonymity. Thomas noticed, but said nothing. He'd seen it before. The rain fell harder now, soaking through his jacket. The old fabric had long since lost its waterproofing, and the chill penetrated to his bones, aggravating the arthritis that plagued him. Still, he maintained as much dignity as he could muster. "Look at him, pretending to be all dignified," the manager sneered to a nearby security guard who'd wandered over. "Bet that uniform came from a surplus store." The words stung. The jacket had been with Thomas for years. The cap had been a gift when he finally left service, one of the few mementos he'd managed to hold onto through the difficult years that followed. As Thomas stood in the rain, water dripping from his cap, not a single person in the growing crowd stepped forward to help the elderly man who had once stepped forward to serve them all. They watched, uncomfortable but passive, as another veteran stood alone, facing indignity with quiet resilience. Through the glass doors, Thomas could see his reflection, an old man worn down by years of struggle. In his mind, he occasionally remembered standing in dress greens, but those days were long past. Now he was just another homeless veteran, one of many who'd fallen through the cracks in a system that was supposed to care for those who served. The manager turned away, phone to his ear, voice crisp with authority. Yes, I need police at the Westview shopping plaza. We have a homeless man refusing to leave the premises, claiming to be a veteran. He's disrupting business and making customers uncomfortable. A pause. No, he's not violent, but he needs to be removed immediately. Thomas closed his eyes briefly, gathering the same patience that had carried him through many difficult days. When he opened them again, they reflected not anger but a weary disappointment. He'd served his country as best he could. Now he faced contempt from those who had never known such service. The call ended. The manager turned back, triumph in his eyes. They'll be here in 5 minutes. I suggest you start moving along before they arrive. Thomas said nothing. The rain said everything, falling indifferently on the just and unjust alike as the divide between them grew wider than the distance of mere feet would suggest. Officer Daniel Reeves pulled into the shopping center parking lot, wipers fighting against the intensifying rain. The call had come in as a routine trespassing complaint, a homeless person refusing to leave private property. He'd handled dozens like it before. Standard procedure: assess, warn, remove if necessary. Usually just moving someone along to become another precinct's problem. The rain hammered against the patrol car roof as he gathered his thoughts. 20 years on the force had taught him that these situations were rarely as simple as they first appeared. He adjusted his body camera and stepped out into the downpour, instantly feeling the cold seep through his uniform. From across the lot, a woman in a bright red raincoat hurried toward his patrol car before he could even close the door. Her face showed concern as rain pelted down around them, plastering her graying hair to her forehead. "Officer, please, the man they called about. He's not causing any trouble," she said, introducing herself as Dr. Sandra Wilkins, a local physician with an office in the adjacent medical building. "He's clearly a veteran, and he's just trying to stay dry. Surely there's somewhere else he can go besides jail." Officer Reeves nodded politely but proceeded toward the growing cluster of people. The crowd had expanded to nearly 20 onlookers, most sheltering under the shopping center's awning, watching the elderly man who now stood alone in the rain. The contrast was striking: dry, comfortable citizens watching an elderly man getting soaked to the skin. "That's James Pullman," Dr. Wilkins continued, matching his stride despite her much shorter legs. "He's been trying to clean up the plaza since he took over management last month. This isn't the first time he's called authorities on someone who wasn't actually causing problems." As he approached, Reeves noticed something about the homeless man that caught his attention. Despite his shabby appearance and obvious discomfort, there was a certain bearing to him, not exaggerated military stiffness, but the quiet dignity of someone who had faced worse than a rainy morning. His own father had served in Vietnam, and something about this man's demeanor felt familiar. "Sir, I'm Officer Reeves. I need to speak with you about." He refused to leave when asked repeatedly. The manager interrupted, holding his clipboard over his head to shield himself from the rain. His expensive wool coat remained perfectly dry under the awning while he pointed accusingly at Thomas. "We can't have homeless people sleeping in our doorways. It's bad for business. Our customers feel threatened." Officer Reeves held up a hand to silence the manager, a gesture that clearly surprised Pullman. "I'll handle this, sir. Please step back and give us some space." Thomas Mercer looked at the officer with quiet resignation. "I apologize for the inconvenience, officer. I'll be moving along." As Thomas began to gather his few belongings, his hand trembled slightly, a combination of cold, age, and the lingering effects of stress and poor nutrition. The small movement caught the officer's attention. It reminded him of his father's hands in the final years. "Sir, do you have identification?" Officer Reeves asked, more gently than the manager expected. Thomas reached inside his jacket and pulled out a worn military ID card protected by a plastic sleeve. As he handed it over, a set of dog tags slipped out from beneath his shirt, dangling in the rain. They clinked softly, a sound that carried Reeves back to childhood when his father would let him hold the metal tags, explaining their purpose with reverent seriousness. Something about the name on the ID made Officer Reeves pause. He glanced at the dog tags, then back at the ID. His expression changed subtly as recognition dawned. The manager, still hovering nearby, noticed the shift and frowned in confusion. "Excuse me a moment," Reeves said, stepping away to make a call on his radio. The rain seemed to intensify around him as he moved to the edge of the crowd, speaking quietly into his shoulder mic. The crowd watched with growing curiosity. Whispers circulated. Who was this homeless man? Why was the officer suddenly treating him with such deference? A few people shuffled uncomfortably, aware that they'd stood by while an elderly veteran was forced to stand in the rain. Dr. Wilkins moved closer to Thomas, offering him shelter under her umbrella. I was a medic during Desert Storm, she said quietly. Different war, similar homecoming for too many. How long have you been out here? On and off for a few years, Thomas replied honestly. Had an apartment until 3 months ago. Banking error with my pension. Been trying to straighten it out, but... He shrugged. The story was all too common. Across the parking lot, an unmarked black SUV with government plates pulled in, its wipers working furiously against the deluge. The vehicle moved with purpose, parking in a reserved space near the entrance. The manager fidgeted nervously as a man in a military uniform stepped out and scanned the scene. What's happening? Someone in the crowd whispered, loud enough for others to hear. I think that's a colonel, another replied with growing interest. Officer Reeves returned to Thomas, his demeanor noticeably different, more respectful, though not dramatically so. The change wasn't lost on the crowd, who watched with increasing interest as the drama unfolded before them. Mr. Mercer, could you wait just a few more minutes? There's someone here who would like to speak with you. He turned to the manager, voice firm. Mr. Pullman, I'm going to have to ask you to cancel your complaint. This situation is now being handled at a different level. The manager sputtered, clearly unprepared for this turn of events. But he was trespassing. You can't just... I can, and I am, Officer Reeves interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. In fact, I suggest you make yourself available for questions. Colonel Harrington may want to speak with you as well. The name Harrington rippled through the crowd. A few veterans present exchanged glances. Colonel James Harrington was known in military circles, an officer with connections at the Pentagon who had been advocating for improved veteran services. His presence at a routine trespassing call was unusual. The rain continued to fall, but no one in the crowd dispersed. Something told them they were about to witness something important, something that would challenge how they viewed the seemingly invisible people they passed every day. Dr. Wilkins remained steadfast beside Thomas, her red raincoat a splash of color against the gray morning. The umbrella she held covered him more than herself. In the distance, another police car pulled into the lot, followed by a local news van. Word was spreading. The invisible man was becoming visible at last. Thomas Mercer stood quietly at the center of the growing attention, uncomfortable with the spotlight but too tired to walk away. His eyes, watchful and wary, followed the approaching colonel with a mixture of recognition and uncertainty. After years of being overlooked, someone was finally seeing him, though he wasn't entirely sure that was a good thing. The moment hung suspended, like the raindrops caught in the morning light, a moment when everything was about to change. The military officer from the black SUV approached with purposeful strides, his uniform neat despite the downpour. He wore the insignia of a Marine Corps colonel, the silver eagle gleaming on his collar. The rain fell steadily around him as he moved directly toward Thomas. The shopping center manager stepped back instinctively, suddenly aware that the situation had shifted beyond his control. The crowd fell silent, sensing the gravity of what was unfolding before them. Even the children stopped fidgeting, caught up in the palpable tension. Thomas Mercer, the colonel asked, his voice carrying across the now silent crowd. The use of his full name caused Thomas to look up sharply. Thomas straightened slightly, an old habit from his years of service. His expression remained guarded. Yes, sir. The colonel extended his hand. Colonel James Harrington. I've been looking for you. A confused murmur rippled through the onlookers. The colonel wasn't saluting or showing extraordinary deference, but his respect was evident in his manner. Parents bent to whisper explanations to children. Veterans in the crowd watched with particular interest. Officer Reeves stepped forward, addressing the crowd. His voice carried the authority of his uniform reinforced by genuine respect. This is Thomas Mercer, United States Army, retired. He served 2 tours in Vietnam. The manager's mouth opened in shock as the implications of his actions began to dawn on him. The homeless vagrant he'd been trying to remove was actually a veteran with connections that reached to the Pentagon. Colonel Harrington turned to face the crowd, his voice clear and direct. Mr. Mercer received the Bronze Star for his service during the Tet Offensive. After being wounded himself, he helped evacuate several injured soldiers under fire. A collective murmur rose from the crowd. The Bronze Star was a significant decoration, awarded for heroic service in combat zones. The shopping center manager's face drained of color as the colonel continued, each word driving home the magnitude of his misjudgment. Pullman looked desperate to disappear, but found himself frozen in place by the collective attention of the growing crowd. After his service in Vietnam, Mr. Mercer continued to serve our country in various capacities for many years. Some of his work remains classified even today. The rain fell steadily, but no one noticed anymore. Every eye was fixed on the elderly man who stood somewhat straighter now, though discomfort was still evident in his posture. Years of homelessness and struggle had taken their toll, regardless of his service record. An elderly woman pushed through the crowd. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached Thomas. "Mr. Mercer? I think you served with my brother, David Wilson. He mentioned you in his letters home." Recognition flickered in Thomas's eyes. "Wilson? Radio operator. Quiet guy, good at chess." The woman's eyes widened. "Yes, that's him. He made it home because of men like you. He has grandchildren now." Thomas nodded, a hint of genuine warmth breaking through his guarded expression. "How is he?" "He passed 5 years ago," she said softly. "But he never forgot his time in service. Said it defined him." Thomas nodded again. "It defines a lot of us, one way or another." As word spread through the crowd, a middle-aged man stepped forward. "My father was in Vietnam. 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines. He didn't talk about it much, but he always said we forgot about the men who served there." I think he was right. Each comment painted a clearer picture of the man who had been dismissed as just another homeless veteran, a man who had served honorably and then fallen through the cracks of the very system he had defended. A young security guard approached hesitantly. "My grandfather was in Vietnam. He always said we never did right by you guys when you came home." "I'm sorry, sir." Thomas accepted the sentiment with a slight nod. "Different times. But that doesn't make it right," the young man insisted. Colonel Harrington addressed the shopping center manager directly. The crowd parted to reveal Pullman, who looked as though he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. "Mr. Mercer's pension issues are being resolved as we speak. A clerical error, one that should never have happened, left him without resources temporarily. It's unfortunately all too common." The manager stammered, his earlier confidence evaporated entirely. "I didn't know. I wouldn't have. That's the problem, isn't it?" The colonel's voice was measured but carried undeniable authority. "We don't know. We don't see the sacrifices made by veterans like Mr. Mercer. We just see what's on the surface." The crowd had grown to nearly 50 people now, many standing in the rain out of respect. Several veterans had pushed to the front, forming a loose circle around Thomas. Dr. Wilkins, still holding her umbrella over Thomas rather than herself, spoke up. "I've been offering medical services at the veterans shelter downtown. Mr. Mercer has been helping younger vets there, men and women struggling with PTSD, with navigating the benefits system. Even when he had nothing himself, he was still trying to help others." A local news crew had arrived, capturing the unfolding scene. The reporter, a young woman with genuine emotion showing on her face, kept her microphone lowered, respecting the dignity of the moment rather than intruding upon it. Officer Reeves stepped forward, extending his hand to Thomas. "Sir, on behalf of the police department, I apologize for how you've been treated today. My father served in Vietnam. He would be ashamed of how our community has failed you." Thomas shook the offered hand, his grip still firm despite the cold and rain. "Just doing your job, officer. Your temporary housing situation is being addressed, Mr. Mercer," Colonel Harrington said. "A car is on the way to take you to proper accommodations while your pension situation is expedited. The VA office has been notified about your case." The shopping center manager stepped forward hesitantly, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine remorse. Rain plastered his expensive haircut to his head, his designer glasses fogged with moisture and shame. "Sir, I am deeply sorry for how I treated you. If there's anything I can do." He trailed off as Thomas turned to face him directly for the first time, the full weight of the veteran's quiet dignity silencing further words. The contrast between them was stark, the manager in his sodden designer clothes, Thomas in his worn military jacket that suddenly seemed to carry the weight of history. The crowd watched, rain-soaked and humbled, as the manager extended his hand to the man he'd been ready to have arrested moments before. The gesture hung in the air between them, an offering, a question, a plea for forgiveness. Would Thomas accept it? Every eye watched for his response, understanding that this moment represented something larger than just two men in the rain. It embodied the nation's complicated relationship with those who had served and been forgotten. Thomas Mercer looked at the extended hand, his expression thoughtful. Decades of being overlooked weighed against years of service and sacrifice. The crowd held its collective breath, rain forgotten, as they waited to see which would prove stronger, justified resentment or the capacity for reconciliation. Thomas looked at the extended hand for a long moment. The crowd held its collective breath, the only sound the steady drumming of rain against the pavement. Then, with quiet dignity, he clasped the manager's hand briefly. "We all make mistakes," Thomas said simply. Those 4 words, spoken without flourish or drama, seemed to release something in the collective conscience of everyone present. A tension they hadn't fully recognized dissolved into the rain-washed morning. That handshake became the first step in a transformation that rippled through the community gradually but meaningfully. Its impact would be felt long after the rain stopped and the crowd dispersed. By afternoon, the story had spread throughout the town of Riverdale, jumping from person to person, social media account to social media account. The local news station ran it as their lead story, "Homeless Veteran, the man we failed to see." The reporter who had witnessed the scene firsthand delivered the story with genuine concern that resonated with viewers. By evening, 2 local veterans organizations had reached out to Thomas. The VFW Post president personally drove to the hotel where Thomas had been temporarily placed, bringing with him a new jacket and some essential supplies. "We should have been looking out for you," the Post president explained. "That's what we're here for." The shopping center manager, James Pullman, spent a restless evening reflecting on his actions. By morning, he had drafted a new policy: veterans in need would always find assistance at the shopping center's information desk, with staff trained to connect them with appropriate services. The document sat on his desk beside a photograph of his own grandfather in military uniform, a connection he had somehow failed to make when confronting Thomas. 1 week later, Thomas moved into a small apartment near the Veterans Hospital, his pension issues resolved after Colonel Harrington's intervention. The back pay arrived, providing much-needed financial stability. But he didn't retreat into privacy. Instead, he agreed to speak at the local high school about veterans' issues. The school auditorium fell quiet as Thomas stood at the podium, his manner straightforward as he addressed the students. "Military service changes you," he told them. "Coming home changes you again. When you see someone struggling, remember, you don't know their story. You don't know what battles they've fought, not just in war, but after coming home." A teenage boy raised his hand. "Why do so many veterans end up homeless, sir?" Thomas considered the question carefully. "It's complicated. PTSD, injuries, trouble adjusting to civilian life. Sometimes the skills that keep you alive in combat don't translate well to civilian jobs. And the system that's supposed to help has a lot of gaps in paperwork." He paused. "It's getting better in some ways, but we've got a long way to go." The shopping center transformed its community bulletin board into a resource center for veterans, displaying information about local services and support groups. James Pullman, the manager, ensured that his staff received training about veterans' issues and resources. "I misjudged someone based on appearance," James admitted during a small gathering unveiling the resource center. "I never stopped to consider his story or what he might have been through. That was my failure, not his." The changes continued, spreading through Riverdale gradually but meaningfully. Officer Reeves established a new police department protocol for interacting with homeless veterans, connecting them with services rather than treating them as disturbances. The program, named Second Look, encouraged officers to consider possible veteran status when encountering homeless individuals. Reeves occasionally stopped by to check on Thomas, their initial uncomfortable encounter having evolved into a respectful acquaintance. The officer sometimes brought coffee and conversation, learning bits and pieces of Thomas's story, not just his military service, but the complicated journey that had led to homelessness. "My father struggled after Vietnam," Reeves told Thomas one afternoon as they sat in a local diner. "Never talked about it much, but I saw what it cost him. Makes me wonder how many other veterans I've encountered without realizing it." Mrs. Wilson, whose brother had served with Thomas, invited him to dinner where he met her family and shared some memories of David that they'd never heard before. Not war stories, but small moments of humanity in difficult circumstances, chess games by flashlight, sharing packages from home, looking out for each other in countless small ways. "David always had extra socks," Thomas recalled with a slight smile. "Said wet feet would kill you faster than the enemy." He wasn't wrong. On cold mornings, Thomas could sometimes be found at the Veterans Center, talking with other former service members. He didn't present himself as a hero or expert, just someone who'd been through similar experiences and understood the challenges they faced. "Thomas helped me figure out my benefits," a Gulf War veteran told a reporter doing a follow-up story. Took me through the paperwork step by step. Didn't make a big deal about it, just knew his way around the system. His old military cap remained, but it now hung alongside a new one, a gift from fellow veterans at the VFW post. Thomas wore either one depending on his mood, both symbols of different chapters in his life story. The rain still fell sometimes, as it had on that pivotal morning. But now, when Thomas Mercer walked through the shopping center in his jacket, people nodded with recognition. Not because he was celebrated as a hero, but because they had learned to see the person behind the circumstances. Dr. Wilkins had expanded her volunteer medical services at the Veterans Shelter, inspired partly by Thomas's situation. He reminded me that medical care isn't just about treating symptoms, she explained as she examined a veteran with chronic pain issues. It's about seeing the whole person and their unique challenges. The way we treat veterans says a lot about us as a community, Thomas told a reporter who eventually came to write about the changes in Riverdale's approach to veteran services. Not just on Veterans Day, but every day. The reporter, a thoughtful woman with a brother in the service, asked Thomas if he felt angry about his years of struggle after serving his country. Anger doesn't fix anything, Thomas replied. Better to focus on making things work better for the next generation coming home. As autumn turned to winter, the shopping center installed a small veterans resource kiosk where information about benefits, housing, and medical services was readily available. On Tuesday mornings, representatives from various veterans organizations were on hand to provide assistance with paperwork and applications. Thomas occasionally volunteered at the kiosk, not as a celebrated hero but as someone who understood the system's complexities firsthand. His experience navigating bureaucracy proved valuable to others facing similar challenges. James Pullman made a point of greeting Thomas whenever their paths crossed. Their initial confrontation transformed into a relationship built on mutual respect. The manager had changed too, less quick to judge, more willing to listen. My grandfather never talked about his service, Pullman told Thomas one morning. I wonder now what he went through, what he carried with him. I wish I'd asked. Many don't want to talk about it, Thomas replied with the insight of experience. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just be there. In the end, Thomas Mercer's greatest contribution wasn't some dramatic act of heroism, but the quiet dignity with which he faced both war and peace. His story had shown a community how to see people beyond their immediate circumstances, how to recognize that the homeless man on the corner, the quiet woman at the bus stop, the elderly veteran in worn clothes might each carry stories and struggles invisible to passing eyes. One recognition, one handshake, one moment of respect had created changes that continued to ripple outward, affecting lives in ways that no one could have anticipated on that rainy morning when they called police on a homeless veteran. Not dramatic transformations or grand gestures, but small, human moments of connection that, together, began to bridge the gap between those who served and the society they returned to. Thomas Mercer had spent years believing his contributions were behind him. Now, in the later chapter of his life, he discovered that sometimes the most important service happens quietly, in small moments of human connection, and that meaning can often be found in the simple act of being seen not for what you once were, but for who you are right now.